The final draft for the 2020 Dietary Guidelines for Americans is in. Find out what's in it here today on Jimmy Rants. Click on that little box down there in the corner. It'll take you straight to IGTV for today's episode. JimmyRants.com is the website, and as always, if you want to engage live in the content, you got to go follow me over on Instagram. I'm at Living Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you're there, you can engage live, just like all these wonderful people across all my platforms. Thank you for being here today. We are simulcasting live over here on my Facebook page, where Nancy just popped in to say hello. We also are going live as well on my YouTube channel. A lot of people are checking out the YouTube channel, just like RJB just popped in from Houston, Texas. So thank you all for being here today on Jimmy Rants. If you missed the live here on Instagram, we do go put it on IGTV when it's all over. Go check out the replay. You can catch them all there. We also put the past episodes up over on YouTube. Just type in a keyword, Jimmy Rants. You will find the show. Finally, go over to the official website for this show. It is JimmyRants.com. And while you're there, you can see all the past episodes as well as support this show. I don't have any sponsors or anything on this show. I am supported just by you. So if you like the content I do, definitely click on that Patreon link, and any amount would be greatly appreciated. So before we get going with today's topic, which is a really good one, I want to remind you today is Thursday. So on Thursdays, I do a show called Real Talk. So I have been doing some interviews lately. My Real Talk co-host, Dr. Will Cole, is taking some time away. And so while he's away, I'm doing Jimmy Moore things. I know how to do interviews. So right here in Jimmy Rant Studio, I am recording some. And so today I've got a great one with Danielle Hamilton. She is a blood sugar expert, very much into low-carb diets, a nutritional therapist. And we had a great conversation. But I have it up today, you guys, as a Jimmy Rants bonus video over on YouTube. So when this is over, if you want some more content, go check out that video with me and Danielle. Had a really great conversation with her. And if you can't catch the video, listen to the podcast over at llvlc.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. Again, the name of that show, Real Talk. Okay, today I have some news about the 2020 Dietary Guidelines. So every 5 years, the USDA and the Health and Human Services in basically the U.S. government commission a committee to get together to come up with guidelines for diet that are based on all the latest science. And they've been doing this since 1980 was the very first one. And like I said, every 5 years. So the last one they did was in 2015, and it was for 2015 to 2020. This new one that they've been working on this year is for 2020 through 2025. And so they will announce the final version that will get published and will become basically the law of the land when it comes to nutritional health for the next 5 years. They'll do that later this fall. But they just released, you guys, all the details of what they have in the final draft from the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee of what they want to put in there. Now, I've been doing several Jimmy Rants lately about some of the special interests that are involved in helping to shape who gets on that committee. I've also expressed concern that the committee themselves look at the dietary guidelines not as something that helps to treat people who are sick, but they actually had the audacity to say, oh, no. The dietary guidelines are designed for people as a generally healthy principles. To which I kind of call BS on, because if a way of eating is good for people who are sick, which is what a lot of the studies are showing, the studies looking at diabetes, the studies looking at high blood pressure, the studies looking at virtually every cardiometabolic marker known to mankind, and not to mention obesity, all of those studies is what they look at when they go look at things like a ketogenic diet and its effect on all those. The Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee said, oh, no. We're not going to include any of that because all of that is in relationship to a specific disease, and thus it's irrelevant in a general conversation about health. And I'm going, wait a minute. So you think a nutritional modality that is helping improve cardiometabolic markers somehow is not healthy for the general population just because the general population doesn't have said disease? What about prevention? But I digress. If you just joined us, we're going to go over the details of what is in the final draft of the 2020 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. And there's some probably predictable stuff in here. There's a few unpredictable stuff as well. And one organization, I've got a quote here from them. One organization is extremely happy about this, the guidelines that are coming out, and they are a plant-based organization, if that gives you a little clue as to what I'm about to share with you. Okay, so the U.S. Dietary Guidelines Committee goes after added sugars and sugar-sweetened beverages, the public's health, the growing call for health equity, and our democracy demands far better than national nutrition policy recommendations written by lobbyists on the advice of industry-connected scientists who were nominated by industry trade groups. In part because of the pandemic and government shutdowns, this year's committee failed to reach conclusions on 24 of the 80 topics they were charged with addressing. So there were 80 total topics that they were looking at as it relates to your diet and its impact on your health. 80. They did all but 24. And what's interesting about the 24 is they were important. And yet they said nothing. Didn't even give a cursory mention to it. So that's interesting. So those were completely left out. So if you're looking at the dietary guidelines for Americans for 2020, and you're expecting it to be a totality, comprehensive view of all things nutrition and as it relates to your health, it ain't going to be there this year. And of course, they're blaming it on the coronavirus. USDA and our partners at the Department of Health and Human Services take all comments and concerns about the dietary guidelines process very seriously, says Food and Nutrition Service Administrator Pam Miller when asked about the rush to push forward the recommendations in the middle of a pandemic and civil unrest. Throughout the entire 2020 to 2025 dietary guidelines process, we have relied on the nation's leading scientists and dietary experts to inform our development of science-based guidelines and have taken numerous steps to promote transparency, integrity, and public involvement. I have a very not so nice word to say. It's going to stay right there, but you can imagine what I think about that. Is she kidding me? That they feel like if you omit information out there from being included in this decision about what to put in the 2020 to 2025 dietary guidelines for Americans, that is somehow fully science-based and fully transparent with full integrity and public involvement. I can tell you for a fact, you guys, I know all the key players in the keto world, a lot of them being researchers. And these researchers, people like Jeff Follick, and even non-researchers like Nina Teicholz with the Nutrition Coalition, these guys have been trying to put on the radar screen of the Dietary Guidelines Committee, look, we don't have any evidence that saturated fat is somehow harming people's health. And they were pretty much shunned. They were like, yeah, we don't want to look at that. We don't care. We don't care about that at all. And so they're pretending like they're being transparent, full of integrity, and having public involvement, but they don't want to hear anything that runs counter to what they want to put in there. And this is the problem with the dietary guidelines. People don't realize this. They are not scientific. Because if they were scientific, they would take into account all the evidence and include the evidence even that they disagree with. And if the evidence is contradictory to some other evidence that's in the guidelines, perhaps that is reason enough that if you have strong evidence for one modality of eating and strong evidence for another modality of eating, perhaps offering a multiplicity of choices is the answer. And yet they've never come to that conclusion. All they do is put out these edicts. The Beverages and Added Sugar Subcommittee was unable to get 3 out of their 5 assigned topics done. For added sugars, only 1 of 5 questions were addressed, leaving out questions such as what is the relationship between added sugar consumption and the risk of type 2 diabetes? They did not answer that question. Or the relationship between added sugar consumption during pregnancy and gestational weight gain. They did not address that one. Big questions. And before I get into the details of what's in there, I want to read from a press release, and this is from the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, okay? PCRM. So if you're not familiar with PCRM, they are a major vegan front group. They have been led by Dean Ornish, basically every major vegan that you can think of. And they're not based on any science. They're all about vegan propaganda. Listen to what they had to say about the details of what I'm about to read you here. The Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine applauds the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee for recommending in its scientific report released today that Americans need to avoid saturated fat, avoid cholesterol, and red and processed meats, and instead focus on carbohydrate-rich plant-based foods for optimal health. Are you getting a vibe for where I'm going with this today? When PCRM, a major vegan front group, comes out and is extremely happy with what they did, you know what's in the guidelines is not going to be good. But the doctors group faults the DGAC for failing to warn about dairy. So they get all of this other stuff. Avoid fat, avoid cholesterol, avoid red meat, avoid processed meat, eat lots of plant-based foods, but then they're upset because they still eat dairy. And that's one of the points you're going to see here in a minute. They did include still eating full-fat dairy because there's plenty of evidence that shows that's healthy for you. But this group, PCRM, says the leading source of saturated fat in the American diet is dairy. It's going to increase the risk of heart disease and all these health conditions. They're not going to be happy until the whole world is vegan. You guys know that, right? You know that that's their modus operandi with all these things I've been sharing with you about making a 3D steak the other day and a Jimmy Rants. The Beyond Meat burgers, all this is designed to try to get everybody to be vegan. The Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee recommends dietary patterns that provide the majority of your energy from plant-based foods. Things like vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, protein and fats from nutrient-rich food sources, which are not apparently meat because they don't like that, and limiting the intake of added sugar, solid fats, and sodium. They finally got it right, says this vegan front group PCRM. Plant-based foods are beneficial for every health condition, and red and processed meat are beneficial for nobody, says Susan Levin. She's the Director of Nutrition Education for the PCRM. But they missed the mark when they failed to warn about dairy. Blah, 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 blah. The report notes that reduced cause of all-cause mortality was observed in several studies. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, so they like some of the things, and I'm going to read it from here before I get to the main findings, because there was definitely some quotes in here directly from it that I think you're going to hear the vegans say, oh my gosh, this is awesome. And again, the fact that they are seeing this as a good thing, it's a sad day if you're a believer in saturated fat, in meat, and in low-carb ketogenic nutrition. So on cholesterol, they say it's prudent to recommend lower intake of foods high in dietary cholesterol. Remember, 2015, what did the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee say? Cholesterol is not a nutrient of concern. That was in the last 5 years' dietary guidelines. Cholesterol is not a nutrient of concern, meaning we're not going to put a restriction on it anymore. You're not. And so if they're not going to put a restriction on it anymore, why are they adding the restriction back? What has changed in the science in the last 5 years? I watch the nutritional health science very voraciously, and I will tell you quite proudly, nothing has changed in that science. It's exactly the same. But PCRM says research has shown that dietary cholesterol raises your blood cholesterol. No, it does not. Every single study out there that looks at dietary cholesterol intake, it always shows that the body's endogenous production of cholesterol downregulates so that it does not unnecessarily boost your cholesterol levels. So that's a lie. And they said, and thus, because it raises cholesterol, it raises your risk of heart disease and death. Again, no science that's randomized controlled clinical trial actually shows that. They also recommended that fruits, vegetables, and grains are the most beneficial components of a healthy diet because it reduces the risk of diseases like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and bone health. The report says a noteworthy difference from the 2015 committee report is whole grains are now identified with almost the same consistency as vegetables and fruits. Did you get that? Whole grains have now risen to the level of equivalency to eating vegetables, non-discriminate vegetables, and fruit, again, non-discriminate. So, we've always heard fruits and vegetables are healthy. Fruits and vegetables, fruits and vegetables, fruits and vegetables. Now they're doing whole grains, fruits and vegetables. Are you okay with that? Of people thinking that whole grains are on the same wavelength and level as fruits and vegetables? That's what the Dietary Guidelines for 2020 is saying. These 3 plant-based food groups are fundamental constituents of a healthy dietary pattern. That's directly from the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. How about meat? The Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee warns against red meat and processed meat because they are associated with conditions including heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and colorectal cancer. Associated. So they are now warning people against eating red meat, warning people against eating processed meats because of associations, not direct cause and effect, associations to heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and colorectal cancer. Now, this is my concern. I said at the beginning that one of the things the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee said why they weren't taking into account the ketogenic, low-carb ketogenic research is because most of that research has to do with some kind of a disease, like heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and cancer. And yet their recommendations for warning against consuming red and processed meat is for heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and cancer. So how can you both be against looking at something, looking at a specific disease, and thus that evidence is not brought to the table, and then use evidence that shows the opposite is true, and yet you're not looking at the good evidence that shows it is true? You see what I'm saying? They're going all over the board here. Red and processed meats are not associated with any health benefits, according to PCRM. Of course, you would believe that if you're a plant-based advocate. Finally, saturated fat. The Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee recommends replacing saturated fat found mostly in animal foods with unsaturated fats found in plant foods and carbohydrates to lower cardiovascular risk disease. The Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee says common food sources of sat fat are mixed dishes of cheese and meat, pizza, and full fat dairy like cheese, cream, and ice cream, and whole milk. And again, they're not real happy about that. But they're not happy at PCRM about dairy. The Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee says 2 to 3 cups equivalent of total dairy are recommended for consumption each day. The recommendation is 3 cups for most age sex groups, regardless of your activity. They say high-fat dairy is associated with type 2 diabetes, but the report fails to address many other health concerns. Scientific evidence shows blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to read their talking points about how much they hate dairy. But that's PCRM, you guys. That is the vegan front group that pretends like they are a group of scientists and they're propagandists spreading the vegan message. They're happy about what's in this final draft of the 2020 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. They're happy. So if the vegans are happy, if you are a meat eater, you're probably not happy. So let's actually get into it now. I have the full details about what's in the final report, the final draft of these guidelines, and I have a bad feeling that it's going to be more of the same, if not a little bit worse than it was the last time. And as much as we want things to progress when it comes to nutritional health, it's not going to progress thanks to the dietary guidelines. If it's going to progress, it's going to happen because people like us remain vigilant about what we've seen in our own lives, and we share it word of mouth to other people. But this is disappointing. And again, I remind you, some people are like, well, what does this matter? I don't pay attention to the guidelines either. And it's not about you paying attention to the guidelines. You have to think of it like a law. They are passing nutritional health law. And that nutritional health law is what guides everything in our society. Those school lunches that your kids are forced to eat, the reason every single food is on that plate is because of the dietary guidelines. It's got to have all the parameters of the guidelines right there on that school lunch plate. So if you're questioning why they put bread on your kid's plate, or why they have a starchy vegetable on your kid's plate, or why they limit meat on your kid's plate, that's why. It's the dietary guidelines. If you're a member of the military and you go to the commissary to try to pick up food, the food that is available for purchase there is based on the dietary guidelines. Women who, the Women, Infants, and Children WIC, basically the welfare benefits, they are based on getting those benefits to go to the store to get food. You have to purchase foods that fit the dietary guidelines. And never mind when you go to the doctor and the doctor tells you, well, you know, the official guidelines for Americans to eat is this food plate, and here's the dietary guidelines, go read them and follow them. So let's not pretend like this does not have an impact. Let's not pretend like this is, well, we'll just laugh these off. We always laugh them off. Okay, you do, maybe. But what about your neighbor? What about your coworker? What about your friend that you care about and they keep citing this? See, we've all become awakened to what they've done to us. Not everybody has. All right, let's get into this. The U.S. Department of Agriculture posted the 2020 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee's final scientific report today. It's an objective review of the latest available science on specific nutrition topics. No, it is not. It's not objective in any way, shape, form, or fashion. We need to get this idea that this Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee is the grand poobah of all things when it comes to diet. Yes, these people have a history in the nutritional health space, but history and integrity are two different things. And a lot of these people are bought and paid for by industry dollars. I did one Jimmy Rants recently where over half of the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee members are a part of an organization that is tied to direct funding from Coca-Cola. So let's stop pretending like that these are completely objective reviews from the most respected scientists on nutrition in the world. Bull. I had a worse word to say, but I'm going to keep it bull. The report's evidence-based findings will inform the USDA and U.S. Department of Health and Human Services as they develop the 2020 to 2025 Dietary Guidelines for Americans, which will provide recommendations on what to eat and drink to promote health and prevent chronic disease. All right, so let's take a look at the USDA Food, Nutrition, and Consumer Services Deputy Undersecretary Brandon Lips. Here's what he had to say. Science-based dietary guidance is critical to ensuring a healthy future for America. The USDA greatly appreciates the high-quality work done by this committee comprised of all the nation's leading scientists and dietary experts. We look forward to thoroughly reviewing the report and leveraging their great scientific advice as we partner with the HHS to develop the new edition of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. Blech! They pretend like these people hung the moon. And of course, if you're trying to fool people that you've done a truly scientific process of vetting out everything as it relates to nutrition, You have to boost the people that are giving you the recommendations. You have to make them look good. Because if they don't look good, or if they look like they're flawed in any way, how trusting will people be of that recommendation that comes out? They wouldn't be. And so therefore, if you say they're of the highest quality, leading scientists and diet experts in the world, then who's going to question that? Not many. The USDA and HHS are accepting written public comments on the committee's final report through August 13th. So after you watch this Jimmy Ranch, you will have an opportunity to go and basically give your input. Dietaryguidelines.gov, I believe, is the website, and they're taking comments through August 13th, 2020. Can I tell you, though, as someone who actually testified before the committee in 2010, the 2010 guidelines, so 2 guidelines ago, it was nice to get it out. It was nice to go ahead and share my thoughts and my input as an American citizen to them. But it didn't make a hill of beans difference. I think they have their mind made up long before this committee, this advisory committee, goes through this like mock process of observing the science. I don't think they give a crap about the science. And I know Nina Teicholz at the Nutrition Coalition. She's banging her head against the wall. And a lot of these people, a lot of the researchers in like the keto and real food space, have been showing all the science when it comes to saturated fat and meat intake and all these things, and they just don't care. And I think the sooner Americans realize the irrelevancy of these guidelines and then push for the guidelines to be not necessarily having such a heavy hand over things in our society, like school lunches. Like if you're a parent of a kid in public schools, don't you want those kids to be able to have access to food that is nutrient dense and healthy and makes them good students when they learn? Of course you do. Right now you're handcuffed, though, because the USDA Dietary Guidelines don't permit them to serve anything that's not in those guidelines, so that matters. The public is having an opportunity to provide oral comments on the report to the department at a public meeting on August 11th. So I wonder how that's going to work in the midst of the coronavirus outbreak. Is that in DC? Like when I testified, I went to DC and there was about 80 something of us from around the country, most of which were like industry people. And there was 2 like average everyday people. I was one of them. And the other one was a mom who just happened to be coming through with her family. And she said, hey, I want to testify. And so she was the very first speaker, and she was all about, we need to be pushing real food. What are you doing? All this other stuff doesn't make sense if people aren't focusing on real food. I was like, you go, girl. So yeah, I mean, they're going to accept the oral, but again, to what end? Okay, they hear your oral testimony, they give you 3 minutes. So you get 3 total minutes to speak, and it goes in the public record, of course. And then they move to the next 3 minute, the next 3 minute, the next 3 minute, until all the oral presentations are done. But then nothing changed. Nothing changed about what they wanted to do. So I don't know if you're wasting your time and your effort and putting yourself at risk getting out there in the midst of coronavirus. It's just such a shame that they can't be more genuinely scientific. Okay, so let's get into this, you guys. They focused on this story. This was in my local, one of my local stations, but they had like a nice summary of everything, focusing on the no added sugar for babies. And they're giving early feeding advice. The baby thing was funny. Like they put the focus on that. I thought there were much more important things, but they were talking about nutrition in the first 1,000 days, blah, blah, blah. Marion Nessel says these advisory groups' recommendations are enormously influential, which is why I'm talking about them here today. They govern food assistance programs. They have an influence over food industry marketing, and that's true. Look at what happened after the 1980, the very first dietary guidelines came out. What did we have in the food industry in the 1980s? A robust, low-fat diet basically boom. That's when the low-fat diet products came crazily out there. So these do influence it. Oh, if it's in the dietary guidelines, they can put like a little USDA symbol. Oh, this is like approved by the USDA. And of course, what's the USDA? United States Department of Agriculture. So why wouldn't they include grains alongside vegetables and fruit? And why wouldn't you vilify the biggest opposition to that, which is meat? Also influence the actual guidelines and food advice for the public, because the public hears this stuff. And again, your doctor will say, well, you know, the dietary guidelines say, and how can you refute that? All right, so Nestle says this is an impressive, solid, conservative review of the existing science. No, Marion Nestle, no, it was not. At the outset, I was concerned that they might be influenced by food industry. Yeah, no kidding. And let's not kid ourselves. The food industry is having a powerful influence over these guidelines. She might think that they didn't have any influence, but again, I'm going to remind you in case you forget. Over half of the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee is a part of an organization whose primary funder is Coca-Cola. So let's stop pretending like there's no bias from the food industry. I'm so sick of that argument. It's almost like they're trying to cover it up and they don't think we can think for ourselves. They haven't run into Jimmy Moore, because I can think for myself and I can see plain as day when there is bias, and there's huge bias. The bias does not show up in the final report. I think this committee deserves much praise for producing a report of this quality under all the circumstances with the coronavirus. Yeah, let's do like victory laps, that we once again fooled the general public into thinking we did something good when we did nothing of the sort. One key message is in the 2020 infant recommendations: no amount of added sugar is okay. Avoid foods and beverages with added sugars during the first 2 years of life. Why just the first 2 years of life? Why not avoid added sugars the rest of your life? Like, what value does added sugar? I hate that phrase added sugar, by the way, because added sugar makes it sound like, oh, this thing doesn't have any sugar in it and we just added sugar. What they're not telling you is added sugar is on top of the sugars already in the food. So fruit, for example, like a banana, has 29 grams of carbohydrate, almost all starch and sugar. That would not be an added sugar. But they act like that sugar that's in there, and never mind the added sugar, there is none, but they act like that sugar doesn't have any effect on you at all. It's got a profound effect on your blood sugar and your insulin, your inflammation, and all these things. It does. All right. So they talked about don't drink sugar-sweetened beverages when you're a baby. Added sugars are used in processed foods and beverages to sweeten. They differ from the natural sugars that are part of a piece of fruit or glass of milk. Okay. Yes, they're different, but do they have a metabolic difference? I would argue no, especially if you already have insulin resistance, especially if you already have a propensity for not handling sugar and carbohydrates well. We don't need to be recommending people even eat the natural sugars that are in things like fruit and milk. This is why on a ketogenic diet, we don't eat sugary fruits. If you do get to have fruit, I hate you, because most of us with insulin resistance can't handle that. And same with milk. We don't drink milk. Lactose is the sugar in there, and it's not bueno for your body, those carbohydrates. This is why we have heavy cream, or we do some other forms of dairy that's less carbohydrate. Apples and oranges all contain sugar, but they provide fiber and overall nutrition, according to Dr. Stephen Abrams, who is the chair of the American Academy of Pediatrics Committee on Nutrition. Okay, Mr. Pediatrician, thank you for apples and oranges contain sugar, but they provide fiber and overall nutrition. They act like the nutrition that's in things like apples and oranges can't be found in other sources. This just amazes me, and it just shows you our education on nutrition is so devoid. of the facts. Did you know you can get most of the vitamins and minerals that you find in things like apples and oranges also in red meat? Sometimes you have to eat some little bits and parts, liver and things like that, to get extra ones. But it's far superior to eat red meat and animal-based foods than to eat any plant matter. The top 20 most nutrient-dense foods in the world are all animal-based foods. And yet they don't recognize that here. Eat your apples and oranges. Mother's milk has sugar in it too. See, they're trying to say, this natural sugar is in the mother's and breast milk, so therefore, if it's there, they're making the equivalency, and it just doesn't fly. 100% fruit juice may appear to offer the same nutrition benefits as whole fruit, but it does not, so I agree with that one. Fruit juice, especially for kids in the first year of life, is a source of sugar without many nutrients, so this should be avoided. I think it should be avoided your whole life. Basically, 100% fruit juice is Coke. It's a soda. We need to look at fruit juice as soda. Yes, you get a few little vitamins in there, but at the end of the day, sugar is sugar is sugar is sugar is sugar. And it's going to be just as harmful as if you drank soda. They do say that you're allowed 4 ounces of 100% fruit juice by the age between the ages of 1 and 3. Again, I don't think they even need it then. And who's just drinking 4 ounces? Is a mom just going to pour a little bit in a little cup, 4 ounces worth, and then that's it? No. The kid would be like, juice, juice, I want more juice, juice. Pour. Juice, juice. And before you know it, the kids had 10, 12 ounces of juice. The committee found that nearly 70% of added sugar intake comes from 5 categories. Sweetened beverages, obviously, if you have a soda or even one of these fruit ones that have sugar in it, you have to add sugar to those. Desserts and sweet snacks, coffee and tea, candy and sugars, and then the final one, breakfast cereals and bars. Well, the problem with breakfast cereals and bars, these are the very foods that are promoted as healthy. Even the ones that supposedly aren't sweet tasting, like shredded wheat, Cheerios, and things like that, they're still not addressing the carb question. Oh, no, Jimmy, you can't mix it up there, because whole grains is the same as vegetables and fruit. That's not added sugar. Never mind that those grains that are refined in Cheerios turn into sugar in the body. And let's not forget about Honey Nut Cheerios. They do add sugar into that. You see where I'm going here? On a food label, added sugars can include brown sugar, corn sweetener, corn syrup, dextrose, fructose, glucose, high fructose corn syrup, honey, lactose, malt syrup, maltose, molasses, raw sugar, and sucrose. Parents should avoid this kind of added sugar in a child's diet. The committee recommends because of the strong link to childhood obesity and future chronic health conditions. They pretend like they care about these kids' health. To which I would say, okay, you're talking about their diet in the early days, but then at some point they stop being a kid. Let's say they become an older kid, a preteen, a teenager, and then an adult. Why don't the same principles that we're applying to them early in life then still apply later in life, when I would argue later in life is when they need those recommendations a lot more than the first part of their life? I think they got the cart before the horse here, and they're not seeing the big picture. All right, so let's get into the older children and adults. The committee dropped the recommended amount of added sugar from 10% of daily calories to 6%. Again, added sugar is not the main thing. This is a smokescreen, guys. You're going to hear all about this. Added sugar has been dropped from 10% of calories to 6%. That would be 120 calories coming from added sugar each day. Let me do the math for you. That's 30 grams of added sugar from one of those sources I just mentioned. Corn syrup, sugar, high fructose corn syrup, honey, blah, 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 blah. So 30 grams is the limit. But that's the added sugar. What about the natural sugars that are in foods? What about the sugars and the carbs when those carbs get into the bloodstream and they get converted into sugar in the body? They don't address that anywhere in here. And so this whole focus on added sugars, I hated it. Michelle Obama, when Barack Obama was president, she changed the food labeling, and one of the things she was most proud of was adding added sugars to the labels of foods. And I'm going, okay, that's all well and good to see what extra sugar's in there, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater and not realize that it's the total amount of carbohydrates that matters. And I did a Jimmy Rants on that one because I feel like we haven't, or I didn't do it, Jimmy Rants didn't exist then, but I talked about that at the time, that we have to realize that all carbohydrates can turn to sugar in the body. This focus on added sugars makes it seem like the carbohydrates and the natural sugars aren't relevant, but they are. And they know this. That's the thing about this whole conversation. This is not new to them. All right. All right, so they go into a few more things about kids. I'll skip over those. Let's go to the next part here. Sorry, they're doing a lot of stuff on kids here, and I wanted to see everything. So, additional recommendations for the general public adults, and I talked about this one a couple of weeks ago. The committee is suggesting reducing current guidance for 2 drinks a day, talking about alcoholic drinks for men, 1 drink a day for women. Recommended limits for both men and women who drink would be 1 per day on days when alcohol is consumed. Research has indicated higher alcohol consumptions associated with an increase in all-cause mortality. Those who do not drink should not begin to drink because they believe alcohol would make them healthier. So they're putting the limit of 1 drink a day, but they're putting the caveat, hey, this does not mean we want you to drink, but if you drink, we only want you to have 1 a day. Which again, no. If somebody likes their beer on the weekend, they're going to keep drinking their 6 or 8 or however many beers they have. If you already drink 2 glasses of wine, you're not going to titrate that down just because they put it in, well, we recommend. And again, when they put these recommendations out there, you don't always see the reasoning, which is why I say this whole kind of mirage that, oh, they're based on science. Okay, well, show us the science. Like, wouldn't you like to see that? What exactly is missing from this analysis? The committee did not tackle the topic specifically of red meat. Oh, but PCRM said that they said don't eat meat. Isn't that interesting? They didn't tackle red meat. It's a major supplier of saturated fat in the American diet, huge player in the argument over food sustainability and environmental impact. Why would they not take on red meat? I think that's very interesting. Now, PCRM says, oh, they addressed it and they said, don't eat it. No. No, they did not. They just didn't address it. So I wonder what the silence means. What do you guys think the silence means? Is the silence of, we don't want to get involved in that one because there's a whole lot of vegans that will come after us? Is the silence because carnivore is a big diet trend right now and you'd have those people come after you? Is it because it's become a highly political debate in the nutritional health space that you don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole, so if you say nothing, it just goes away? Like, I find that interesting. This whole conversation trying to paint the picture that red meat is the boogeyman by the vegans, they could have easily cited a whole lot of evidence that shows red meat is completely healthy. What are they hiding? Why don't they want to address it? Very curious. Sodium and salt and their role in the growing epidemic of hypertension and heart disease was also not included in their assignment, which again is interesting. We've been told, cut our salt for how many years? And now we realize how important salt is to electrolyte balance and all sorts of things in the body. But they didn't address it. Meat and salt. How do they ignore meat and salt in these guidelines? Like, surely you say something about them, cite some study, cite something. Nothing. Crickets. Silence. Are you concerned about that? I suppose them not saying anything is better than them saying something stupid. But at the end of the day, when you don't say something and you have knowledge available to learn, it speaks volumes. By not saying anything, it speaks volumes. The report says remarkably little about sodium intake beyond that it's overconsumed and people should reduce it. Well, who defines overconsumed? And what kind of salt are we talking about? You talking about the man-made salt that's in a lot of processed foods? That's not salt. How about Redmon's real salt? Should we be limiting this? This is from a mine in Utah. Why is that needing to be limited? There's no reason for it. The committee also did not address drinking water over other beverages for hydration. Dilly dilly. Why would they not focus on basic items? Meat, salt, water. What did I just describe? These are the things they did not address in the dietary guidelines. Meat, salt, water is the carnivore diet. Do you think they were trying to avoid it? I wonder if they hope by 2025 the carnivore diet movement has trickled along and people aren't doing that fad anymore. Have they made us all vegan yet? Yeah, let me know when they've made us all vegan, and then we can start talking about the bad stuff about meat, salt. Don't doubt me on this one, guys. Them not addressing it is them hoping that all the forces at play trying to make us all vegan is going to go into place. Just you watch. They did not touch on the need to limit the American fascination with overly processed foods. How can you not tell people, don't eat junk food and eat real food? How hard would that have been to put in the dietary guidelines? I would dare say, make the very first line that people read when they're reading the dietary guidelines for Americans, make the very first thing they see, oh, above all else, eat real food. I wonder if we could do that. I wonder if we could put out rational dietary guidelines for Americans. We could come up with that. Those of us in the Jimmy Rants family, you guys could help us create this one-pager edict of how to eat and guidelines that would guide Americans on what the best way to eat. And the very first thing all of us would absolutely agree on is eat real food. Why can't they do that? Ultra-processed is the new way of talking about foods that should not be consumed regularly or in large amounts. Tons of evidence has come in within the last 5 years. Oh, we've had tons of evidence on ultra-processed foods for much longer than that. The word does not appear in the report except in references. So they don't even talk about ultra-processed food. I call it crappy garbage. I call it food like disease agents, but it's just junk. Devoid of any nutrition whatsoever. Is just basically nothingness. And people eat it on a daily basis. If the committee considered all the evidence, it did not spell it out explicitly, talking about on the processed foods. Those issues aren't addressed, critics say, because the independence of the 2020 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee was removed by the federal government. Ooh, did you know that? This year was the very first time the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee was independent of the USDA and the HHS. But again, independent, what does that mean? It means that the USDA and HHS was able to set the scientific agenda. This is what we want you to look at, but they didn't necessarily say, this is how you do it. And yet they still came to all these conclusions. I wonder if that was to address people like me and others who say, well, it needs to be apart from the federal government. And so they did. And yet they didn't. Not only do they need to make the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee apart from the government, they need the whole damn thing apart from the government. Because until it is totally autonomous from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, then we're never going to see don't eat grains. We're not. Why would the Department of Agriculture shoot themselves in the foot? Their sole purpose is to be an advocate for agriculture. While we don't know if the committee would have considered other topics like sustainability, meat, sodium, and ultra-processed foods, and getting the committee's take on these issues would have been a big help, but they didn't. I think that's the big take-home I want you guys to remember in this final draft of the 2020 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. They chose to punt on some of the most important topics that they could have addressed. They did. They punted. They didn't want to mess with it. They totally said, yeah, meat, yeah, we're not getting involved in that one. That one's a hot potato because the vegans will come after us no matter what we say. The carnivores will come after us no matter what we say. Yeah. I'm disappointed. And you should be too. We deserve better. And again, this does not affect us in our individual choices. We all choose to eat the way we want to eat. But the tentacles in our society that these 2020 to 2025 dietary guidelines are going to have ramifications for many years to come. All right, I want to see what you guys have to say over here on Instagram. Then we'll come over to Facebook, finally over to YouTube. Thank you all for being here today on Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. Temple says, can't wait for this. Well, I'm glad you're here. Thanks for being here today. Teresa says, if you're vegan, why do you want a plant-based product that looks and tastes like meat? Yeah, I have asked that question many times, Teresa. Amkar says, will you be saving this? Yes, all of my videos are on IGTV, as well as on YouTube, as well as at JimmyRants.com. So yes, I save all these episodes. Teresa says, looks like 50 years of bad science is going to continue. Yeah, it really is. And for the past 40 years, they've been codifying that in the form of dietary guidelines for Americans. And it's propaganda. Bonnie says it's veganism at its finest. It's unfortunately. Mom Needs Coffee says, I'm very disappointed. Yeah, I stopped being disappointed. I'm turning my disappointment into anger. And the anger into passion. Because we can say, oh, they did it again. Look, they're more low fat. Oh, I'm so disappointed. So disappointed. So disappointed. You can only do that for so long. Now, keep in mind, I've been at this since 2005 was when I started the Atkins diet. So I've seen 2005, 2010, 2015, now 2020. This is 4 cycles of this that I've been through. And really, from that first time I was looking at them until now, not much has changed. In fact, all the good stuff that happened 5 years ago, like dietary cholesterol is no longer a nutrient of concern, that's gone now. They're back to looking at, oh, you need to limit your cholesterol again. Again, no evidence to support that. Pink Piggy Pundit says, I downloaded the report. Yes, go over dietaryguidelines.gov. You can get the full report if you want to see all the little dirty details in there, but it's bad. And they lowered the saturated fat intake to 10% or less of your calories. I mean, they're causing harm and they don't even realize it. And all at the altar of appeasing these food companies. Cariana says, I think the scientific evidence is at least decent that no amount of alcohol is safe. Yeah, the alcohol one is definitely controversial. Linda says, had so many interruptions that I'm going to watch again. Well, I hope you do watch the whole thing, and thank you for being here. All right, Instagram, thank you for that. Let me pop over here now next to my Facebook page. What's up, Facebook? How you guys doing? All right, let's see what you guys have to say. All vegans I know are sickly and many have diabetes, says Kira. Yeah, a lot of them aren't as healthy as they want us all to believe. That's true. Thank you, Facebook. Let me pop over here now to YouTube, see if there's any good comments over here I can read. Hello, Charlene. Inquiring minds want to know, she says. The SAD diet has set up the deaths of COVID. Yeah, sadly, many people who are succumbing to it are metabolically unhealthy. Jordan says, why is your content considered kids? I don't get notifications. Yeah, you're going to have to unsubscribe and then resubscribe. There was some shenanigans going on with YouTube where they messed up the settings on my videos. And so, yeah, all my subscribers that used to get notifications when I went live said, hey, wait a minute, I'm not getting your notifications. And we found out that they switched my category from health, I think it was the health category, over to kids. Well, when it's a kids category, you don't get notifications for kids videos. So yes, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and that should fix it. Craig says, ever try using a food label to reverse engineer and compare against dietary guidelines? I'd be interested to know what the carb total recommendations is per day versus what the label suggests. Yeah, I don't know that they're giving a carb total amount for the day in the dietary guidelines, but they definitely are pushing a high carb diet. Now, what that is, I don't know, but that's a good thought. What you're saying is comparing it to what the USDA dietary guidelines are saying. I bet a bunch of them are close. They're all cheap processed foods. RJB, just think about what each of us will be fed if we end up in the hospital or in assisted living. Oh, I'm going to have somebody bring me food if I'm in the hospital, and God forbid I go in a nursing home someday. Yeah, just try to feed me crappy garbage. Don't you know I wrote Keto Clarity a million years ago? Misfit says, I began homeschooling last year. One of the main reasons was the schools really don't want food from home. It comes out of in their policies. Oh, I'm sure that's happening for sure, because the more mouths they feed, the more government assistance they get. Yeah, I was concerned about that when I heard like parents talk about, oh yeah, they don't like it when you bring food from home, and plus you got the whole liability thing of what if they get sick, blah blah blah. But yeah, if they don't give you good food at school, what else does a good parent have to do? They have to send their kid good food. Like, what if you're a carnivore dieter, a keto dieter, and you don't want your kids eating all that junk that they serve at the school lunch? Are you forced to make them eat it just because the dietary guidelines guide those lunches? I don't think so. But I have heard stories of parents telling me that they'd go to school and they'd walk by tables, and if kids did not eat their bread, they forced them to do it. Well, the dietary guidelines, we got to follow the blah, blah, blah. Oh, you didn't eat the starch, blah, 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 blah. And what about these plant-based meats? They going to start putting those into the school lunches and you parents don't even know about it? Don't doubt me on that. I bet it's coming. All right, guys, so that's the details on the 2020 Dietary Guidelines for Americans. It's not the very last draft, but it's the final draft from the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee. It is under review right now by the USDA and HHS. They are taking public comment in the form of going to dietaryguidelines.gov, or you do oral testimony by August. So next few weeks, they're going to be solidified. And once they're set in stone, they're going to release them probably around October, November is usually when they come out with them. And they'll be out there for the next 5 years as the law of the land as it relates to nutritional health. And God help us all. That's it for this episode of Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. And as always, you can engage live in the content, but you got to go follow me right here on Instagram. I'm at Living Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. We go live Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. So be there, be square. I do have some people telling me they don't get the notification. So I'm always here, 11 a.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. So just come on to Instagram and I should be right there. We also simulcast over on my Facebook page as well as on my YouTube channel. Thank you all for being here today. Watch the replay on IGTV. We also have it up over on YouTube. Type in a keyword, Jimmy Rants, you will find the show. And don't forget, over on YouTube, we got a bonus episode, Danielle Hamilton today. Go watch it over on my YouTube channel. Finally, go to JimmyRants.com. It's the official website for this here show. And if you like what we do here, definitely click on the Patreon link, and any donation of any amount would be greatly appreciated. All right, guys, that's it for now. We'll be back again real soon. Bye.